Hello there, it's Carrie Rhodes here. I am happy to be guest designing for WOW this month and sharing with you some fun cards I made with new embossing powders that just came out. I'm going to be doing some emboss resist and decorating or dressing up some die cuts. I'm using the Hexagon stamp set and these pastel gemstone embossing powders. I love these trios and especially this one. It's so pretty. I'll also be using the super smooth cardstock and stamping down that hexagon background onto an A2 size card front panel. I'm using the embossing pad because I love how long it stays wet. That is really helpful and very cool. So I'm stamping this down onto my white paper with clear ink, and then when I emboss it, I'm embossing it with clear powder so that I can then put a background over the top and it's going to resist every spot that is embossed. So now that the powder is sprinkled on, we'll heat that up with the embossing tool to melt that powder, and we'll have our image embossed. It'll be shiny and kind of raised up. Now for my other two backgrounds, because I'm making two cards, I stamped the same background kind of at a diagonal, and then I only partially stamped the card front. So I'm going to have three different backgrounds. Now let's do some resist with watercolor. To watercolor, I'm going to use my Salvage Patina Distress Oxide pad and this large paintbrush. I'm going to spray some water into that ink to loosen it up and then just brush this across the paper. Now once this dried, I did go back and add a second layer with a little bit less water so I could see a lot of the brush strokes in the background. I loved that look. Once that was dry, and you can see the brush strokes there, I put some more ink on this little window sheet and then I'm splattering it onto the background for some added interest. I love splatter so much, so I wanted to combine that onto this background. For my next background, we're going to do resist with spray. So this is the background where I only partially stamped the paper, and I'm spraying that with Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to buff off the spray that is still sitting on top of the embossing powder. You can just rub it right off. I did wait a minute to let the spray dry on the cardstock itself. It looks so good. I also wanted to splatter this with water, so I spritzed some water on with my distress sprayer, let that set for a second, and then just picked up the excess. And to speed the drying, I used my WOW embossing tool on setting 1 just to dry it, and then I'm going to splatter it using the nozzle of that spray to get some darker splatter marks on there, and that was a really cool addition. Next, we're going to do resist with ink blending. I'm using Mustard Seed Distress Oxide and this traditional style ink blending tool. I'm going to try and keep the ink darkest at the top and lighter at the bottom, but I'm just kind of giving it a once over little dusting of ink, and then I'll go back and intensify the top and just work my way down. And also on this panel, I can buff off the ink that's still sitting on top of that embossing, and you can see the background really pop and turn bright white once I rub off that ink. I'm also going to do some spritzing with water. I love this look. I mean, if you can do this with your inks, why not do it, right? I'm going to dry that because I also want to splatter this with the same mustard seed ink, but this time in the Distress Oxide spray, just using the nozzle, and then I'm going to get some darker flecks of color also. Okay, now we're going to set the backgrounds aside and move on to embossing some die cuts. So I have these scripty words. They're from Trinity stamps, but this is a great way to dress up any of your die cut words that you have. So I'm going to use this thanks right here. I'm sticking it down to a piece of tape. It's like paper tape, kind of like a sticky note, but it's select your own size. So I can stick my entire die cut on there and press it down into my embossing pad. Now the entire die cut is covered with embossing powder and we can emboss the whole thing. And for this one, I'm using the Blue Adventurine powder. This is kind of a turquoise color, that kind of salvaged patina. It's going to go really good with that background that I made. And then it's got the flecks of gold in it. And the blue powder itself is really fine, but the flakes of the gold powder are larger and they appear to float within that blue powder. It's just the coolest thing ever. All right, I wanted to do this 2 times to really get good coverage and a thick die cut. So I once it was dry, pressed it in the embossing pad again, sprinkled more powder on, and embossed it again. So now there's going to be some of those gold flecks that appear to kind of be in the background, and then some that appear to be floating on top. It is so incredibly gorgeous. I'll try to show it to you a few more times. And then I mounted this to its shadow layer that I cut from some gold. So now we're going to turn all of these things that I'm making into cards. I will do some more embossed die cuts, but now that I have one done and you've seen how that goes, we'll move on to making the cards. So I am taking just a supporting sentiment to go with my thanks, and it says "so very much," and I'm embossing that with gold powder on some cardstock that's going to coordinate with the colors I'm using in this card. And look how beautiful that melts. Now, while I was making these cards, I kept noticing this gold metallic paint out of the corner of my eye. And because there's gold flecks in this embossing powder that I'm putting on my die cuts, I decided it would be really fun just to add a little bit of the gold acrylic paint splattered on my background. So I've added this to an A2 top folding card, and I'm adding my supporting sentiment and then my embossed sentiment that's just gorgeous. Then I'll embellish it with some gold satin baubles, also from Trinity stamps. They go really good with that kind of brushed gold look going on in this card. And there you can see a close-up peek at that die cut with the embossing powder on it. It's so amazing. All right, let's move on to the second card. This time I'm going to use a different die cut that says "Celebrate." And again, just pressing it down into that embossing pad, and then I'm using the rose quartz embossing powder. They're so amazing, and it's just elevating these die cuts to a whole nother level that you can only achieve with this powder. So then we emboss it, and the look of just doing one layer is pretty cool, but it really steps it up a notch when you do two, which is what you're seeing here. The two layers of the embossing powder just elevates it because it makes it a little bit thicker and like rounded, and the different layers of the trapped gold flecks, just amazing. Okay, so my supporting sentiment here says "So proud of you," embossing that on some pink cardstock, also with that gold embossing powder. And you know what, it's still magical every time I emboss to watch that powder melt. I love it. All right, I did add more gold splatter to this one, just like I did on the last card, and then I can adhere down all my sentiments. And this one looks so good because the embossed background just kind of fades out behind the sentiments. I love it. I use the same exact embellishments on this card. They just went really well. The little addition of gold accents is just standard throughout my cards today. Look at that embossing. Oh, okay. For the third one, I decided to pull out a yellow piece of cardstock to die cut my hello from, because the yellow in the embossing powder just seemed a little bit too light and like a different tone of yellow than my mustard seed background, and I love how this looks. So you can just change up how this embossing powder looks by using a colored cardstock, and that's really good, so you can customize it and use it more than just one way. All right, so just a note to say is going to go with my hello, and I'm going to put this on diagonally because I kind of stamped that background a little askew, and I think it's a really fun way to use these on this card. Then the hello is going to go right above that. The yellow, I can't decide which one's my favorite, but this yellow on the yellow paper, I was really excited about that, how that turned out. So there is on my A2 size card, and I will go ahead and bring back the embellishments and add a few of those in and around the sentiment for a little bling. I just think, if you have these things, you gotta use them, right? I can't not put embellishments on my cards. So there is my third card. We're going to take a look at all three of these together so you can see how these different powders look side by side. I think they're so much fun. I really am having a good time at using these different powders this month that just came out. I love them so much. The Party Popper one also super cool. And also this background is super versatile. I can see myself using it a lot. So thank you for stopping by and watching another video with us at WOW. And if you're new here, feel free to subscribe because we have new videos all the time. And I will see you all again very soon. Happy stamping! Bye!